Well, good afternoon. I'm Josette, Sheeran, the Executive Director of the World Food Program, and today we're here to discuss fresh solutions to food security. I don't think we need this discussion more than ever, and none too early. We've just come through a global food crisis that has left an additional 75 million people urgently hungry. Today, nearly 1 billion people, or 1 out of every 6, go... Hello? Okay. Is that better? Okay. I said we're gathered to discuss fresh solutions to food security, and none too early. We've just come through a global food crisis that has left an additional 75 million people urgently hungry. Today, nearly 1 billion people, or 1 out of 6, go to bed hungry. This is coupled with the devastating effects of undernutrition. In some nations, up to half the children are stunted, and in the developing world, 25% of children do not get enough nutrition to grow healthy minds and bodies. This past 2 years, we saw food riots break out in more than 30 countries, and one government was toppled over food prices. This devastating setback, a nearly 10% increase in urgently hungry, follows decades of gains. In fact, between 1969 and the year 2004, the proportion of hungry in the world was cut in half, from 37% of the population to around 17%. But last year, the World Food Program had to go through the largest emergency scale-up in our history, reaching 100 million people that needed urgent help. But here today, we're going to discuss the solutions and the long-term solutions, and we have a wonderful panel to put on the table new approaches that can not only address this challenge, but take us into the future. This is a winnable battle. The world actually produces enough food for everyone on Earth to have adequate access to secure nutrition. And that's how I would define food security: adequate and secure access to affordable nutrition. This year may prove no more challenging than the last two. Chatham House, in a study just released a couple days ago, warns of the coming food crunch. After some alleviation of commodity prices, last month saw a 20% increase in grain costs globally. And the financial crisis is hitting poor families and poor farmers hard, perhaps another silent tsunami. As Andrew Natsios, the former head of AID in the United States, has just written in his article, The Coming Food Coups, though it is unlikely that famine will sweep across the globe, causing revolution, upheaval, and mass starvation, the consequences of the increase in food prices since 2004, and that could still be dire if prices continue to increase and a severe worldwide recession drastically reduces family income in developing countries. We have a wonderful panel of experts, and I'm going to start by asking them a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor for dialogue. And basically, we want to assess where are we today on global food security? Are there solutions that need to be put on the table and empowered? And are there fresh solutions that simply have not gotten enough attention yet? I'd like to start with former Secretary General Kofi Annan. Mr. Annan, this October, speaking on a conference on hunger in Ireland, you said, only agricultural development, and more specifically, an African green revolution, will end poverty and hunger in Africa and end the continent's unsustainable reliance on food imports and food aids. With this year's past food crisis and now the financial crisis, are we out of the woods? What is your assessment of the current situation?
Thank you very much, Josette. Let me say that we still have a crisis. And I think the work you're doing with World Food Program to ensure that those who are hungry today do get enough to eat is very welcome and very important. But as well as the short term, we need to look at the medium to longer term and get Africa to produce enough food to assure its own food security. African farmers do not usually get the right seeds, the high-yielding seeds, the pest-resistant, to plant. They hardly use fertilizer. About 40 to 45% of land is irrigated in Asia. It's only about 4 or 5% in Africa. So we, as Alliance for Green Revolution, and Gates Foundation is one of the founding members of the Alliance, are working with African farmers to ensure increased productivity. We are working with them to ensure that they get the right seeds. We are training scientists, encouraging people to breed seeds through conventional methods. We are also working with them on soil and eventually on irrigation, marketing, and really basically trying to ensure that the farmer can get their produce from the farm gate to the market and earn a decent living on what they produce. It also requires that the governments adopt the right policies, the right agricultural policies, which are also rural friendly. They will need infrastructure, irrigation systems. And so it is something that the governments have to commit to. The African governments have committed to agricultural investments. They want to invest 10% of their budgets in agriculture, and we are encouraging them to do that, and they would want to see 6% growth in agricultural productivity. These are good objectives, but we want to see it done. We are also encouraging other partners to join in this exercise. The private sector, other governments. Today we have partnerships with the Rome-based agencies, World Food Programme, FAO, and IFAD. DFID is working with us. European Union, we are in discussions with them, and we hope will join us very actively on the ground. But more excitingly, we are beginning to get the private sector to understand that there is agribusiness in Africa. It's not a mom and pop thing. It's not a small scale. There is money to be made in agriculture. The farmers are hardworking. The governments are determined to come up with the right policies and the right regulatory systems to allow business to prosper. Some of the things we are doing is not only to provide the seeds and others, but work with governments to ensure that fertilizers come in on time and is made available to the farmers. We are also going to train what we call agro-dealers, thousands of them we hope, who will be dotted across the countryside in close proximity to the farmers to ensure that the farmers get the inputs they need for the planting season. They don't have to travel hundreds of miles to the cities where there are no roads. And this would also help increase production. And on top of that, we are trying to encourage banks and insurance companies to take a critical look at agriculture in Africa. We are discussing with insurance companies the possibility of coming up with weather-indexed products which the farmers can buy. And they've done it in Asia for small farmers, and they tell us it is possible. We are encouraging the farmers to form cooperatives so that they will have statements and records to show the banks. Because when they go to get a loan, they always ask to show documents and other which they don't have, but as cooperatives they could have. We have also been able to generate additional resources into agriculture. We started with it in Kenya, where we leveraged a $5 million guarantee into $50 million to bring seeds and fertilizers to help the farmers. We're going to do another one in West Africa with another bank. We did it with Equity Bank, and here we'll be doing it with Standard. Probably another 200 million. I wish it were billions. 200 million going into agriculture. And so we really are trying to do something about the need for investments in agriculture. And we are encouraging the business sector to take a critical look and work in partnership with the governments and the farmers to do it. The farmers work hard. Unfortunately, the African farmer is usually a woman, and she either sings or swims on her own with no support, hardly any from governments, no financial loans, no management advice. But hopefully with some of the work we're doing, we will be able to correct that and help this farmer get the revenue she deserves from her hard work. I'll pause here and move on.
Thank you. Mr. Prime Minister, I will turn to you next. You are responsible for the food security of your nation, and Thailand is the world's largest exporter of rice. Some would say food prices have been too low, commodity prices for many years, and that the increase is healthy to generate greater production. But no doubt this price volatility that we've been through has had a deep impact on the farmers of Thailand. In 2008, production was increased, then prices were lower. Is there a sustainable model that can help farmers and the world's hungry weather this volatility? Do you expect price and supply volatility to continue? Last year, only 7% of rice was traded on global markets. And are we seeing a fundamental disruption in the global food markets?
Let me begin by making some observations. I know so much attention was put on food security after oil price and commodity prices shot up. And there was clearly an allocation or reallocation of resources towards energy crops. But the fact of the matter is it should surprise us all that as we develop the world, and the world has never been more advanced in terms of technology, in terms of creating wealth, that more and more people are actually becoming hungry. It's also ironic that for a country like Thailand, which is seen to have a food surplus, we are leading exporters of rice, of tapioca products, of cane sugar, that in fact the people who produce food are also the poorest in the country. So to me, that suggests that the problem we are facing is a reflection of a combination of market and government failures. That the system that's in place as far as the agricultural production and distribution is concerned is being distorted. That's the root cause of the problem. Before we started, I think there was a presentation showing places in the world there are shortages. And the fact of the matter is, in neighboring countries to those countries that are facing shortages, with similar conditions, with similar amount of land or water, why are there problems in some countries and not in others? And if you look at the history of famines, you will discover that sometimes food is actually flowing out of the areas where there are famines. The root cause is all about distribution of purchasing power. And unless we address that head on, we are going to continue to see imbalances. Frankly put, we've got developed countries providing enormous subsidies to their own agricultural sector, which leads to the lack of competition in the world market, depressing prices and opportunities for farmers in the developing countries. So it's no surprise that we have a shortage or lack of incentives to produce the amount of food that we should have. Distribution, clearly, unless we have a fairer system that addresses the issue of poverty, again, even if you had the amount of food, they will not be distributed to those who need it if they don't have the purchasing power to get the food to them through the market system. So to me, that we have to attack the problem on two fronts. In terms of increasing production, using more advanced technology, investing in irrigation, reforming land holding. These are all essential, and we would certainly welcome another wave of the green revolution to help increase production. But I think that's only half of the story. We need to address the more fundamental issues of distortion and injustice, which is really the root cause of the problem. Let me just mention that in Thailand, despite the food surplus, the very poorest are farmers. Often they are drawn into the market system, doing monocropping, and ended up actually lacking the money to buy their own food. And in Thailand, we are very fortunate to have His Majesty the King, who thought of the concept of a sufficiency economy, where the people who are not ready or who don't have the opportunities or cannot take advantages of the market system are encouraged to make sure that in small communities they look after themselves, have the self-sufficiency for food by having a diverse set of products, agricultural products. And then when they become stronger, they would then be integrated into markets. That's just one example. But my main point would be that it's time to face up to the challenge that we've created far too many distortions as far as the food market is concerned. It's time that the developed nations get rid of the subsidies, create a fair competition, and that we ensure that in all markets, in all countries, we have a way of providing social safety nets, so even the poorest have the purchasing power to gain access to food. For further solutions, I would just quickly mention that in many countries you have a surplus of capital, you have advanced technology, but you lack the resources for agricultural products. But in others, the reverse is the case. Isn't it time that there is some kind of partnership where we explore these complementarities, but working through the market system, working through some kind of pooling system, so that capital and technology can be used to increase production in exchange for this production being set aside for some kind of food reserve that can be distributed evenly at the global level. Thank you.
Thank you. And now to Bill Gates. You have put the full banking of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to addressing some of the issues that the Prime Minister has talked about, in particular the cycle of underproduction and poverty facing the world's smallest farmers. So I'd like to ask you, what role can those farmers play in breaking the cycle of hunger for the world? Are we making progress, and what do we need to do differently?
Well, the food issue is extremely important because over 70% of the poorest people are farmers, and today they often will have a season where they don't even produce enough food to feed their own family. And they never have a chance to get ahead, that is to store up food so that if there's a bad season, they can go into those stocks, or to have enough food to sell it to earn money for school fees, or allowing their kids not to be just working in agriculture. Also, the connection between health issues and nutrition issues are very, very strong. When we look at why kids die under the age of 5, you can often say, okay, it was pneumonia or diarrheal disease. But in fact, if those kids had had better nutrition, those episodes, they would have been sick, but they would not have died. So there's a strong connection between childhood health and nutrition. Over the last couple of years, I think a lot of great things have happened. The attention to food issues has gone up a lot. It had dropped down to be a tiny portion of foreign assistance and not much discussed at all. The amount of funding to the research groups, the CJIAR groups that have done miracle work on seeds and other agricultural technologies, that had dropped down way below its peak. But in the last few years, that's gone up. World Bank and other donors are increasing the percentage they give to agriculture. And we have, even in these last few years, some great success stories. Money's been put into certain commodities like letting farmers be more productive with coffee, put it together in a high-quality form where they can access world markets. That's in the process of happening with dairy. We have a couple grants that are about to be made in some other product areas. And so you can have short-term wins. The long-term miracle of getting African productivity up to the levels that we have in the United States or many other places, that's more like a decade of work. And so it's been fantastic for Kofi and Annan to help pull together a great team in this group called AGRA that's not only got our support, but Rockefeller Foundation, the UK, DFID just put some money in. So we're getting a broad set of grants, and they're getting to critical mass. So now they're a real player. If people have ideas, if people want to buy output from Africa, they're turning there. We are investing a lot in science. Technology is part of the story here. You've got to organize the markets, but you want to have the miracle seeds, and there's a variety of technologies that are providing those. Some of them are drought-resistant seeds, and those are particularly important because of the variability of climate that has always been present in the tropical regions, but will be even more acute in the decades ahead because of the climate change effects. So this last year was a real crisis. It was a tragedy to the degree that it permanently gets us focused on these food issues, though. There's something positive that's come out of it. The European Union just put forward $1 billion for agricultural development that I think will be used in some very effective ways. And so we are seeing a response, and as long as we keep our attention to it, I think these people who are in poverty, the productivity can go up and the impact will be incredible.
Thank you. Irene Rosenfeld. Kraft, like Unilever, is one of the largest food producers in the world, and some say companies like yours have the most leverage to help change the dynamics in the global marketplace and also are in touch with the newest solutions. Are we in a position to solve this challenge, especially as we look to a world where we have to produce twice as much food by the year 2050?
I think we clearly have the capability, we have the technology, I have a microphone just fine, thank you. We have the capability, we have the technology, we have the arable land, we have the water supply. The issue for the world is that we don't have the right food getting to the right people at an affordable price. And so I think it's about access, it's about availability, and it's about affordability. As we think about availability, it is, as Kofi said, it's about increasing productivity, it's about reducing waste from the farm as it gets to the end user. As we think about maximizing access, it's about rebuilding or building infrastructures to get products from one part of the world to another. And in terms of affordability, I think we need to attack it, as the Prime Minister said, on two fronts. I think we need to do what we can to reduce poverty, because it starts there. But then I think we also need to focus, we as suppliers, need to focus on reducing product costs by looking at efficiencies across the supply chain. As we look ahead, though, it seems like we have plenty of time to solve this problem, because you look at the statistics, about 6.7 billion people in the world. The population gets to about 9 billion in about 40 years, and it feels like we have a great deal of time to solve the problem. The problem is that their consumption patterns are shifting as the population is growing, and so more and more, as there's a rising middle class, they're eating more dairy products, they're eating more meat products, they're moving away from pure fruits and nuts and grains, and as a result, it's much more taxing on our planet's resources. And so the challenge for all of us is to think about how we need to work together to address this opportunity, because I really think that without business, together with government, together with the NGOs solving the problem, we cannot get to solutions.
Thank you. Michael Treschow. Unilever produces an astonishing more than 15,000 food and beverage products throughout the world. You are in touch with markets all over the world, and you have been one of the leaders pushing to really bring solutions to those who have been denied access to adequate nutrition. As we look at a world that needs twice as much food, and yet already 1 billion people not getting access to it, what do we need to be doing differently?
Well, I can only take it from more to the micro level, because if you see for Unilever, 2/3 of our ingredients come from the agriculture supply chain, which is, of course, a huge thing for us, which means what we need to do a better job is to work with the supply chain. And when I'm working about the supply chain, it's not only the farmers, but it's also getting it from the farms to the end user. Whether it's the end user is Josette's target groups, or it is end consumers, it's the same thing. And I think one needs to work equally hard on both of them. What is the good thing to work on the retail end is less weather dependent, while the farming is so weather dependent in that sense. And when we look at from a Unilever perspective, we try to focus very much on our competence, which means our competence is actually nutrition or healthy food and hygiene, I would say, and to some extent drinkable water. But that is actually our competence, and that's where we want to work. And what we see more is that going from big farmers being our supply chain to more and more smaller farmers. On the big farming side, we are more and more trying to make sure that we can assess and guarantee that we have sustainable supply of those ingredients. We have committed ourselves when it comes to tea and also on palm oil to make sure it's sustainable and tested and guaranteed. At the same time, when we work with smaller farmers, you can say it's huge. It's a huge thing for us. Only on vegetables, we have 500,000 small farmers in our supply chain. And when it comes to where we think we can do more and more is trying to help to self-help. Our big worry is, of course, that we help so much that we take over. I think the important for us is that it has to be commercially viable. We have to help these farmers or the retailers or everybody in between in the logistic chain to actually do their things. We can provide help and perhaps funds in the beginning. I think we run a rather interesting project in the very west of Kenya in order to help just that. We have a business alliance against chronic hunger together with the Kenyan government and 20 or 30 other institutions. AGRA is part of that, where we want to just prove to ourselves that we can find new solutions how to work the whole chain. And then hopefully we can scale it up from those this year, hopefully some 3,000 small businesses to some 10 and above that. And I think that's where it is that one needs to figure out where can we provide help to self-help.
Thank you. We're going to spend just a couple more minutes up here and then open it to question. I have not predicted this question to the panelists, but I'm going to go to each of you to see if you have a fresh solution you just want to put on the table quickly for discussion here. But also I'm going to ask you, if you want to, on a scale of 1 to 10, are we where we need to be? Governments, business, not-for-profits, civil society, in having our act together to ensure that we are ready for the coming demands on food. Are we at a 9 or are we at a 2? And do we have to scale up in a huge way, or are we almost there and it just requires tweaking around the edges? So we'll go straight down the line here. We'll start with you, Mr. Prime Minister. If there's a fresh solution you'd like to put on the table, and if you want to take a shot at a number, give us your level of confidence or anxiety about global food markets.
Again, in terms of solutions, I would not only support many of the projects many of the panelists are now involved in, and would also just make this point that often people think in terms of how much money is being put in, and that somehow there is some kind of same solution for all situations. In fact, we find that a lot of development financing has been wasted or has not achieved its objectives, partly because they don't tailor the assistance to the conditions. And often the solutions that are required are not sophisticated. Even very simple technologies can lift local people out of poverty. Water pumps, somehow gaining access to markets, or even just diversifying crops. Just these kinds of small actions could be used further. I don't know whether calling for the getting rid of distortions a fresh solution or not. I think it's something that people have talked about for so long, but somehow the world just doesn't have the political will to carry it out. And I think unless we face up to this very, very root of the problem, I don't think that things can get done. In terms of the numbers, all I can say is that as a whole, the private sector responds to incentives. Despite the good intentions and the many projects that are carried out for good social and public purposes, the bulk of the private sector inevitably just responds to incentives. If we don't provide the right incentives so that there is not fair distribution in terms of income, if we don't provide the right incentives so that there's more food to be grown, we will never get out of this problem. And I'm not too optimistic on the current situation. I just hope that more and more people becoming aware and waking up to this problem will somehow jolt some kind of cooperation between the private sector, the public sector, and also the civil society to really mobilize this. I think it's time that we move beyond ad hoc subsidies and ad hoc interventions here and there, and to take a look at it systematically.
Thank you. Mr. Gates?
Well, I think the fresh thing that's going on is that the business sector, including some of the big companies represented here, but also the seed companies, some of the logistic companies, technology companies, are really putting some of their best thinkers onto these problems. Partly just to see what economic opportunity there is, but also to be philanthropic and help out in parts of the market where there isn't economic opportunity for them. So I'd say that's the freshest thing. I spent a little bit of time this morning with many of you where there was brainstorming, and if I compare this year to a year ago, I think the ideas are further along. There's a lot of things being tried, so I'd say that's fresh. In terms of a rating, I'd say we're kind of a 3 going to a 5 in terms of the steps that need to be taken.
Irene?
I think I would agree with Michael that focusing on sustainable agriculture is a terrific way to help people help themselves and begin to solve this problem. I think one of the best solutions that we see is what I alluded to earlier, the idea of trying to get government, business, and NGOs working together to solve the problem. And to that end, the thing that we can bring to the party is our know-how. There are so many areas that those of us that are in for-profit businesses things that we know how to do. We know how to drive efficiencies throughout our supply chain. We know how to leverage technology to drive productivity. We know how to create delicious food that has wonderful nutritional profiles and can be packaged in formats that will survive and will protect the food. We know how to work as a team. We know how to lead, and we know how to move quickly. And I'd love to see us put our collective thoughts together, bringing each of our unique skills to this very pressing issue to try to solve the problem. To that end, I'm afraid that where we are today is a rather low number on the scale that you laid out, Josette, but I have great confidence that if we can begin to do some of the things we're talking about here, we can see an end to hunger in our lifetimes.
Thank you, Kofi.
No, I would also agree that we've seen an incredible number of companies, well-established companies, taking interest in the issue of agriculture. And this is extremely important for the continent that AGRA is focused on in Africa, where most of the food production is in the hands of small-scale farmers. But even there, the partnerships that are emerging, where companies, governments, and civil societies are working together, is proven to be very helpful. Take the area of seeds. Some governments used to want to control that. They were the only ones who can produce seeds. Now they are opening up. The private sector and others are coming in. Obviously, they will have to establish standards. And I'm seeing more and more cooperation between commercial farmers and the small-scale farmers. Just to give you an idea, last summer, my wife and I visited a mango production in a farm in Ghana. The main farm had 150 hectares, but they had recruited 1,000 more outgrowers, each with 1 hectare. And they had a very good system in the sense that since the product was for export, they wanted to make sure they had the same quality from the main farm and from the outgrowers. So they provided them the seeds and made sure that the irrigation was assured. They did it by drip irrigation, and they extended it to the farmers and bought the product for export. And off-season, they can plant whatever they wanted on those farms. They are individual farms of 1 hectare each. So with that initiative, you suddenly have 350,000 hectares being planted, with the farmers involved and active, and also using the common facilities to help them. So these sort of creative ways, working with the farmers, and of course the governments have also realized they need to come up with the right policies that are supportive. And I think in the case of the African situation, where we have to provide lots of food assistance, we can't turn around the corner if we were really to work seriously on the right seed varieties to ensure that we give them the necessary fertilizers. As I said, they use very little fertilizer. Their soils are the most depleted in the world, because each year they harvest the nutrients without putting anything back.
How about a number? Do you have a number for us?
A number? I would be around 4 to 5.
An optimist in this crowd, yes.
Yeah, 4 to 5.
Michael?
Well, starting with the number, I think it's not 5, it's below 5, whatever, 2, 3, something. I think so I'm not sure we need to talk so much about fresh solutions, because there are so many possibilities. If you just look at a company like ours, there are probably 1 million plus supply chains that we can work with. So it's more a matter to focus on what we're good at and trying to figuring out how to do it. I think we learn more and more we can't do it ourselves. We need to do it together with others. And that is a number of stakeholders. But my big worry is always in this, that I've been in big business all my life, and you always have this, I'm here from headquarters to help you. Which means you start, the help becomes not help to self-help, it becomes a way of taking over. And then everybody stands and listens, and then you go home and nothing happens. You have to figuring out, like the Prime Minister was also saying, how do you incentivize all these private people in those chains? And also understanding that there is an entrepreneurial spirit among many, many, many people. And how do you foster that? How do you pull? How do you trigger? How do you incentivize? How do you actually work together with them and make sure that it becomes commercially viable? Because if it becomes commercially viable, it will be a win-win situation.
Well, thank you. Now to all of you. First, I just want to do a quick poll here. Anyone in the audience who is more optimistic than a 3? We want to see who's going to join Kofi with optimism here. And I might ask you to defend your position. So, anyone higher than a 5? Anyone higher than a 5? Okay. Well, let's open it up. And remember, fresh solutions. Are we going to be able to get out of this trouble, and how deep are we in it? I see a speaker here.
Adam Dambara from Zimbabwe. The discussion on food and agriculture in Africa or in emerging markets cannot end without discussing how we can move these markets, these Africans and these emerging markets, up the value chain in food production, up the value chain in agriculture. Yes, it's important to increase productivity and production in agriculture, but the Africans, the farmers in Africa, must be involved in beneficiation in agriculture. Beneficiation in agricultural production, which means don't sell tomatoes, sell tinned tomatoes. Don't sell leaves of tea, but packed tea bags and also coffee. To what extent is AGRA and all these other efforts embracing the notion of moving Africa up the food value chain, up the agricultural value chain towards beneficiation and secondary agriculture?
Let's take 5 quick comments, and then we'll get comments here. One back here. There, and then to the woman. And then we'll go over this side of the room.
Part of the fundamental problem we have is we have production in the rural areas and consumption in the cities. Another fundamental problem environmentally, as the cities are built globally, we are literally sterilizing the globe. One solution is the principle of green roofs. In other words, whatever is built, any new building built anywhere in the cities, whatever land you take out of production, you put on the roof of the building. And by doing that, we reduce the amount of energy that is needed for heating and cooling. We reduce, and if you have biodiversity, and you actually start to grow something in the cities on those roofs, you can increase the land area that we actually have to grow food. We don't have to transport as much to the cities. We can reduce the amount of energy for all the buildings, etc. The transportation cost, the traffic, etc., etc. One policy, it only takes one thing for every government in the world to say any new building must have a green roof. That keeps all business in a same competitive position, and you take human ingenuity and figure out how to make roofs productive for the world.
Thank you for sticking with a fresh solution. I think we had a comment, a woman here that, okay, and then I'm going to go to this side.
I was more of an optimist this morning when I went to the Mobile Revolutions forum, where they were talking about how mobile phones had made a huge difference in Asia and in India, where you put information in the hands of the consumers and the farmers. They talked about very simple voice data that said these are the kind of seeds you could buy. This is even if it was a voice conference call where you could disseminate information to them, that in a daily basis they could get information to have that create that bottom-up opportunity where they were empowered. And if we all believe that information is power, it was interesting. They stated that once you get over about 25% coverage with your mobile information, that for every 10% increase in mobile penetration, they could actually measure a 1.2% increase in GDP. I don't know how accurate their recommendations were, but that concept of bottom-up information was, I thought, a very powerful idea.
Thank you. Comment here?
Bert Heemskerk, chairman of Rabobank. We are, as you know, an agricultural bank, at least abroad. And the way we look at it is what Mr. Kofi Annan said as well, is that the most efficient way to alleviate poverty and alleviate hunger is by organizing the small farmers. There is food enough in Africa. There are people enough in Africa. There is capacity enough in Africa. It's how to organize small, very, very small farmers and make them into efficient farmers. And the way to do that, as you pointed out correctly, is by creating cooperatives or mutuals. You don't have all to follow the example of Rabobank, even if we were very successful in making the Netherlands one of the most rich country in the area of food and agri. And if you create cooperatives, like we did, for example, with Unilever, to organize the small soybean or palm oil planters in Indonesia, and they produce together, not just for their home market, but also for international market. We took ourselves, as Rabobank, participations in bank in Tanzania, in Zambia, Rwanda, and in Mozambique. And there we are converting these banks from saving banks to agricultural banks. And when I was, for example, 4 years ago in Tanzania, we took a participation of 33% in the biggest bank in Tanzania, the National Microfinance Bank, but they did not extend any microfinance to any farmers. There was no farmer getting a loan from that bank. We reorganized that bank together with the Tanzanian people because, as Mr. Treschow said, we don't come from head office, we do it together with local people, together with them. And now, today, we have organized in Tanzania more than 500,000 Tanzanian small farmers into cooperatives, producing now for export markets cashew nuts, coffee, and sugar, for example. And I think that's the way to proceed. I'm a banker, but I think engineer firms should do the things in their area, or Unilever in their area. And if everybody takes its responsibility, I don't know how many years it takes. On the other hand, we should not, I think, overdo the problem. When you start a discussion with there are more than 1 billion or more than 1.5 billion people who are not fed every day, then I think I can't do a thing. I can do things for 400,000 farmers in Tanzania. So let's make down or boil down the problem into areas where each of us can take its own responsibility and can do something in reality. Thank you.
Excellent. And one last comment before we see if the panel would like to respond to these.
Can you hear me?
And then we'll come back to the audience.
Hilary Ben from the United Kingdom. I mean, with 1 billion overweight and 1 billion having not enough to eat, I think that's probably a zero, since you're asking us to score, and it shows how far we've got to go. When the world has had to face really big problems like this, and we're beginning to understand just how big this challenge is, one of the things we've done is to think about whether we've got the right institutions internationally to deal with it. And my question really is, do you think that we have, and what would you identify as the most important thing that can only be done by countries coming together to deal with it internationally, as well as supporting all of the ideas that we've just been hearing about? Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. Let's try to keep the comments up here brief so we can hear from more. But any reactions? The supply chain issue, value chain? Irene, Michael, Kofi?
I'd like to talk about the issue that was raised about moving Africa up the value chain. Just as a small example, we are very much in the cashew business. We buy about 20% of the world's cashews, and they're grown in Africa. They're shelled in India and Southeast Asia. They are then shipped to Western Europe and the United States, where they're packaged and consumed. That cannot be an efficient system. And so as we think about this whole notion of sustainable farming, without a doubt, it starts with the seeds and with the methods of farming. But I think it is very quickly followed by a look at the entire value chain and where we can help to move some of it back to the point of origin. And I think that all by itself can have a profound impact on solving the problem.
Sorry.
And you will save lots of transportation costs.
You save transportation, you lower your costs, it's more efficient, and it's fresher. I mean, there's lots of reasons that kind of an idea makes a lot of sense.
No, I was going to say that Arthur, one of the things that AGRA is looking at is precisely the question you raised, wanting to help the Africans and move the farmers up, assess them all along the value chain. And this is also one of the reasons why we've been reaching out to companies, to banks, to insurance companies to see if they can come up with products that would also help the African farmers and assure their future, even if they have a bad season. So it's very much part of our effort. And I think the idea that we are dealing with a big problem is something that we all have to accept. But one doesn't have to look at it in terms of, gosh, if there are 1 billion people starving, that one is expected to feed the 1 billion. It is a big problem, but if we all did our bit, little by little, we will make a giant contribution. And so I think the sort of issues that we had to say, if you can do it for 400,000 and somebody did it for 100,000 or 20, it adds up. But I think the idea of cooperatives and mutuals are very important, because it's a bad-breaking work, farming. When you look at these women who get up early in the morning and stay in the field in the sun all the time, using cutlass to clear their things, when if they were to band together, they can get other equipment to help them, they can share cost and do the sort of thing that over centuries has helped make Netherlands what it is. And so it's not just the inputs, it's also how we organize and structure ourselves to do it, and to be able to link up to the modern world. Who will give a loan to an African farmer, a woman who walks and says, where are your records? Where are your last year's accounts? And they have, so we really have to organize ourselves in a way that we have not been able to do. It was very exciting for us to sit with Swiss Re and asking them, can you look at products for small-scale farmers which will be weather indexed, and that she said, yes, we are prepared to look at that. That is a partnership with Rabobank and others. We've looked at the question of how you support agriculture and build up. And I think once they strengthen their capacities, they will be able to do a lot and also gain much more from their hard work than they do today.
We have just 10 minutes, and we're going to have to take the comments. Can we just get a few more comments, and then we'll go through here, because I know there was a lot of people. And if you could all keep your comments to really one point. I know there's many. We have one here, here. And let's not lose sight of Hillary's question, and I think implicit in the other question, which is these numbers are overwhelming. What number is unacceptable, and do we need some macro approaches along with the ground-up approaches that are proving so powerful in many countries? Okay. A quick round, please, of comments, and then we'll go. Professor, we have one here in the back. And then we'll start, Michael, with you, Prime Minister Bill.
I'm Howard Conruther from the Wharton School, and I just wanted to build on the comment that Kofi Annan just made and others, and Bill Gates and others had raised earlier. The tremendous challenges with respect to the small farmers and some of the problems immediately that they face immediately. Is there an opportunity for long-term loans, long-term insurance, long-term strategies that one could come forward, but still recognizing that you have an affordability problem, and so there is that question of affordability as part of the issue? So I just want to put that on the table.
Thank you. Perfect length of comment. Let's just take two more quickly. One here and one here.
Would it be useful to develop a food security index?
Even better length of comment here.
Mine won't be quite that short. Tim Hanstead from RDI in Seattle. There was lots of talk about technology and organizing markets and improving the supply chain, all of which are important, but only one brief mention of land policy. And despite the fact that a significant number of those who depend on agriculture are completely landless, particularly in South Asia, many, perhaps most of those who do have land don't have the type of long-term secure rights that would give them the appropriate incentive to make the long-term investments they're often needed. And despite the fact that the women, who are playing an increasingly major role, rarely have legal rights to land. So
excellent.
There are solutions.
Okay. Who feels they have to? One here, and then we're going to the panel.
So we didn't talk about on-farm storage, grain storage. We know that subsistence farmers typically have to sell their harvest, what they don't eat, immediately at the time of harvest when market price is lowest. In Nicaragua, corn prices around the time of harvest are 4 cents a pound. 6 months later, they're 12 cents a pound. So if you have to sell your excess corn to the market cheaply and then buy corn from the market 6 months later, you're obviously in a disadvantaged position. If you have access to storage and to finance, obviously, to cover that period of storage, then obviously we can help subsistence farmers feed themselves much more effectively.
Excellent.
Okay. Luke Alfie, Oxitec. There are many technologies we're developing, genetic technologies, sterile insects. There are many sophisticated technologies for agricultural production becoming available. But so the first question is, how do you get those tools to the developing country farmers? But a critical question is, how do they know how to use them appropriately? The education and training aspects of that. If you can put the tools in their hands still, how do they use them efficiently as efficiently as Western farmers would?
Thank you. We will now go to the panel, but I will just say, in one revolution, 80% of our cash for food aid is now directed at purchases in the developing world. We do 80% of our value-added production of nutritional products in the developing world, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Howard Buffett Foundation, others are helping us do the contracting in advance so farmers can help be part of the solution to hunger in addition to everything else. And Kofi's been pushing for this for many years. Okay, let's, Prime Minister, Bill, Michael, and then Irene and Kofi, you'll have the last word.
Just quickly to respond to some of the comments. I very much agree with the storage issue, but just to draw attention to the real problems a lot of farmers face. in Thailand, we ask the same question: why so? Why so when the price is so low? And the answer is they have to repay their debts. So we get back to the same problem about distribution. So I think the very important issue that was raised is about the institution to deal with this. I think there is an urgent need for an institution that acts as a matchmaker, someone who can get the technology, the know-how, the training to the right people, given the right incentives. And we need new products, as Kofi Annan has said, weather insurance, crop price insurance. The system could be in place with private sector participation, with small subsidies from governments or development aid agencies to get the scheme going and becoming acceptable and understandable to all the farmers. So I think a number of good ideas, and I think there is a real need for an international institution that could put these things together and actually mobilize all these systems and ideas that we need.
Okay, we have 4 minutes. Bill?
I think to agree with the number of points that were made, I just want to use the example of China. Starting in about 1980, they improved their land rights, so that was a very key element. They had some great seeds that Rockefeller and others had helped develop in Mexico and India, and now they've become a leader in terms of understanding particularly rice, but some other crops. A third thing they have is an extension service, that is government expertise made available to the farmers. And as was mentioned, if you have a cell phone, you can take a picture of your crops, you can see how they're diseased, you can do a diagnostic that looks at the soil and gets that data back to the expert. So I think extension is important. One of the technologies that can be used is actually DVD, to get out and have farmers see other farmers do things in a very straightforward way. So there's an idea of a modern extension service. In terms of institutions, I think GAIN is emerging for nutrition, AGRA for a lot of the stuff in Africa. I think reinvesting in the CGIAR, the ones of those that have done a good job. I'm not sure we need many new institutions, but I think we have some models of success where many of these factors have come to play.
Excellent. 30 seconds, Michael. Irene,
if I take my Ericsson hat on the mobile phone, you can just imagine what it would mean if every village or every farm or whatever will have access to information firsthand, to get rid of middlemen, to know what we do together with AGRA on weather forecasting, etc. You can imagine then how we can approaching not a perfect market, but more perfect market than it is today. And then perhaps we get rid of some of the speculators, which means that the volatility in the pricing, etc., in the marketplace will not be as harsh as it has been now in recent time.
I think a bit of this is happening already. I visited a village in Kenya where they had in a small room next to the market, a board on the wall. On the vertical side, they showed all the products on sale, and then on the horizontal side, the cities and how much these goods were fetching in Nairobi, in Kisumu, in Mombasa, and they made their deals via cell phone, cutting out the middlemen. And I walked away, I said, well, they've started their own Chicago Board of Trade, and I hope it grows, and it worked for them. I think on the institutional arrangements that Hillary raised, I really don't know what that institution would be assigned to do, but one of the issues which has been raised since we've been here is the question of a reserve. Some is a arrangement for really assuring food reserve which can be released to avoid the spikes. And in fact, I was worried for Josette that some people wanted her to do that. But what I think may be possible, if all government key producers were encouraged to set aside a reserve which then forms a global sort of standby reserve that can be drawn on within a price band and then regulated by some agency, international agency, whether it's transparent and others, that sort of thing can work. And I think it would be also the most effective way of storing these things and maintaining the reserves rather than going to build huge storage storages around the world. So this is something that one may want to look at.
Thank you, Kofi. Irene?
I underscore again, this is a very complex problem. It requires a lot of the solutions that you all have talked about. They need to come from a combination of business and government and NGOs working together. I heard a comment this morning when Al Gore in the climate change session quoted an old African proverb, which I think is particularly appropriate. He said, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think we all want to go far, and I think that's what it takes. Thank you.
Irene, I would say if I had to take one thing out of the comments we've heard and all that you've said is actually we don't need new inventions here. We need collaboration and to bring together and make sure there's access to the poorest farmers for the solutions that have already brought countries like Ireland out of famine. China was the #1 receiver of food aid 18 years ago. Biggest WFP program today, none at all. So there is hope. We want to thank you all. And a grand coalition, collaboration, sounds like it will get us very far. Thank you.